On paper, U.S. sanctions are supposed to choke Iran's oil exports down to zero under Trump's renewed Maximum Pressure Memo NSPM2. In reality, by late 2025, Iran is still shipping around 2 million barrels of crude per day, the highest level since 2018, with roughly 1.8 to 2.0 million barrels per day effectively ending up in China. At the same time, Iran has built a shadow energy network, a €110 million repair deal to restart Venezuela's El Palito refinery, 100,000 barrels per day refined there, and ex-Iran ghost tankers moving Venezuelan crude that can be flipped to China or used to finance Cuba. The real question isn't, do sanctions work? It's how this shadow infrastructure keeps beating them, and why Washington is now using regime change in Venezuela and potentially Iran to break it. In May 2022, PDVSA and Iran's Enrgy signed a €110 million contract to repair and restart the El Palito refinery, which had been running at about half its 146,000 barrels per day capacity. By late 2022, Iran was refining about 100,000 barrels per day of crude there, which Tehran's oil minister called the first refinery Iran has built overseas. NIORDC also secured work at the Paraguana Refining Center, Venezuela's largest complex, blending Chinese and Iranian parts into a plant originally built with U.S. technology. Strategically, Venezuela sends heavy crude and commodities, while Iran sends gasoline, condensate, refinery parts, and technical teams. That gives Iran a refining foothold in the Western Hemisphere and access to Venezuelan heavy crude streams that can be blended or re-exported under different labels. Cuba's state trader Cuba Metals ramped Venezuelan imports up to about 65,000 barrels per day in 2025, roughly 7 times the 2023 level. In December 2025, U.S. forces boarded the tanker Skipper, previously part of Iran's sanctions-evading fleet, and found 2 million barrels of Venezuelan heavy crude on board. Paperwork said it was heading to Matanzas, Cuba, but investigations showed the oil was likely being resold to China, giving Havana hard currency while Cuba provided security and intelligence back to Caracas. The result is an Iran-Venezuela-Cuba triangle. Iran keeps Maduro's refineries barely alive, Venezuela supplies crude, and Cuba launders part of it into cash via China. Sanctions researchers estimate that the global shadow fleet moving sanctioned crude, mainly from Iran and Russia, has grown from about 70 tankers in 2020 to roughly 550 by 2025, close to 20% of the world's crude fleet. Many of these ships conduct ship-to-ship transfers near Malaysia or Indonesia, then declare the cargo as Malaysian or Indonesian on arrival in China. Between January and October 2025, Chinese customs recorded 9.81 million tons of crude from Indonesia, but Indonesia's own data shows total exports of only 1.7 million tons, with just 25,000 tons going to China, a gap largely explained by Iranian crude disguised as Indonesian. Tanker tracking firms and FDD show that in 2025 Iran exported on average about 1.8 million barrels per day, with September and October flows around 2.1 to 2.2 million barrels per day, almost all into China. Much of this goes to independent teapot refineries in Shandong, which account for roughly a quarter of China's refining capacity and aggressively seek the deepest discounts. Discounts on Iranian barrels have widened to about $6 to $14 per barrel below Brent, saving China an estimated $4.7 to $6.6 billion a year in import costs. For Beijing, Iranian oil is a strategic discount pipeline, not a side issue. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission describes how entities like Chushin and state insurer Sinosure run an oil-for-infrastructure model with Iran, moving around $8.4 billion through a side channel in 2024. In 2023, China imported about $10 billion of non-oil goods from Iran, while Iran imported only about $1 billion from China, leaving a large surplus in local currency that must be laundered and converted into usable foreign exchange. This forms a parallel payment ecosystem, deliberately kept outside China's main state banks so Beijing can keep buying Iranian oil without exposing its core financial system to U.S. secondary sanctions. On February 4, 2025, Trump signed NSPM 2, ordering Treasury and State to restore maximum pressure and drive Iran's oil exports to zero. In mid-2025, the U.S. sanctioned a Qingdao area terminal operator handling an estimated 130,000 to 200,000 barrels per day of Iranian crude, blacklisted Shandong Jinch petrochemical and related facilities, and in December targeted several Venezuelan-linked tankers tied to Iran and PDVSA. Yet UANI and FDD data show that in September and October 2025 Iran's exports hit 7-year highs, roughly 2.1 to 2.2 million barrels per day, and even in November remained near 2.06 million barrels per day before easing to about 1.56 million barrels per day in December. If Washington pushes harder, it risks a global supply shock, higher oil prices, and renewed U.S. inflation, while striking directly at China's energy security and its fragile independent refiners, escalating the broader U.S.-China confrontation. If it eases off, Tehran gains more cash for the IRGC and regional proxies, Beijing keeps its discount, and the perceived power of U.S. sanctions erodes. Unless enforcement hits the true choke points, maritime transport, refinery intake, and financial clearance, maximum pressure risks staying symbolic rather than decisive leverage. And that's only half the story, because this shadow network doesn't just move oil. It moves drones, missiles, and money for a regime now facing open revolt inside Iran itself.